el profesor Michael Niconchuk. El profesor es el director del programa de trauma y conflicto violento en Beyond Conflict. Profesor Niconchuk está virtualmente, me imagino, ¿sí?
Sí.
So hi,
Hola,
Mike.
gracias a todos. Bueno,
It's a
primero no
pleasure
soy
to
ni
have you
profesor
here.
ni doctor.
Everyone, first, I'm
Tengo
not
mi
a professor
maestría
nor a
en
doctor. I have
neurociencia
a master's
cognitiva de
degree
UCL en
in cognitive
Londres.
neuroscience
I'm going to give
from
my talk in
University of
English
London.
though,
Daré mi
because all of the
charla
work
en
and
inglés porque
research
el
has
trabajo y la
been in English, so I
investigación
think better
ha sido en inglés,
in
así
English
que
with
me
this.
ayuda a pensar mejor en inglés.
And for full disclosure, my colleague,
Y
Doctora
para
Vivian
divulgarlo,
Kedari,
mi
who's a
colega Miriam
wonderful and
Yodari,
fantastic colleague,
que es una,
was supposed to be
una
here
colega
today with us,
genial,
and I hope that I can
se suponía que vendría hoy,
fill
pero
her big shoes.
lamentablemente
It's
no
really an
está y
honor to be
espero
here
poder
because Emile, Dr.
satisfacérselo.
Bruno, was
Es
such a
un honor
close
estar
colleague
acá
and friend,
porque el
as
profesor
Boaz
Bruno fue un
knows. I had the
colega y
pleasure
amigo
of working with
cercano
him
y
for
tuve el
several
placer de
years.
trabajar con él durante varios
Emile
años.
was one of the
Y Emil
initiators of
fue
our work
uno
at
de
Beyond
los que
Conflict and really
iniciaron el
inspired
trabajo en
our
Beyond
vision
Conflict e
to
inspiró
integrate
nuestra
social cognitive
visión de
neuroscience, social
integrar la
psychology,
neurociencia y la
and other
psicología
subfields of
social
cognitive
y
science into
otros
our
subcampos
understanding
de
of
las
how we
ciencias
do peace building
cognitivas para
programs and
comprender
how
en
we
cómo
pursue conflict
desarrollar la paz
resolution
y cómo
around
se
the world.
solucionan conflictos alrededor del mundo.
So,
Entonces,
when we think of how do we
cuando
broadly frame the use of
concebimos cómo
neuroscience,
utilizar la
hold on. I
neurociencia,
have my own translation in my ear. 1 second.
hay un problema con el sonido y ahora yo también me escucho, me estoy oyendo yo. Okay.
Okay. That seems to be better. And
Parece que
Fabian
mejoró.
indicate if I need to stop
No,
again.
un momento porque
So,
yo me estoy escuchando a mí.
Beyond
Un
Conflict
segundo.
was,
Un
in
segundo, por
some
favor.
ways, the brainchild of Emile Bruno, and Boaz has worked with us for a long time. And
Por
Beyond
mucho
Conflict
tiempo.
has
Y
worked in
Beyond
this field for a
Conflict,
couple of
no,
years, using a
no es
couple of
me estoy
basic,
oyendo yo.
simple principles that the use of neuroscience and social psychology
El
can
uso de la
advance
neurociencia.
the work of peace building around the world and can improve how we conduct conflict resolution programs in places where there have been histories of violent conflict or where there still might be violent conflict going on. We started this work probably 10 years ago in an initial engagement that brought together folks, like many of whom are in this room, with individuals that had lived through conflict, some from Colombia, some from Guatemala, Chile, Indonesia, and places like Bahrain, Rwanda, the Congo, countries around the world that had lived through similar conflicts. Not similar in the actual details of who was fighting who, but oppressor, these deeply ingrained and entrenched identities that don't simply disappear once a conflict is over. My own family, my mother is from Guatemala, and I knew through being raised by a mother from Guatemala who lived through the Conflicto Armado that the identities that get formed and entrenched during cycles of violence do not go away even in the medium and long term after guns are put down, after any acuerdos de paz, in places where acuerdos de paz have been achieved. So when we started this work, we wanted to bring together individuals who were doing the research, really conducting research both in labs and in applied settings, research that we knew could improve how we were doing the work on the ground. I myself came from a practitioner background. I have worked for the past 10 years in mental health and psychosocial support programs for refugees from Syria, from Iraq, and from Palestine, and have also worked very closely with individuals who have been participants in violent extremist movements or in armed movements in general. And the process of laying down your arms, the process of reintegrating into society, the process
de
of communities
reintegrarse a la
being
sociedad.
willing to let you
Ahora me escucho yo otra
reintegrate
vez.
is not a simple one. And it requires all of the might that we have of scientists, of researchers, of scholars, of practitioners, and of individuals with lived experience in this space. For the past several years, Beyond Conflict has been engaged in different places around the world on a premise that science is a right, that individuals and communities have an access not only to current findings from neuroscience, from social psychology that can be useful, but they have a right to also dictate how these findings are being guided to transform interventions in their communities. Neuroscience, cognitive science writ large, offers something that very few other fields offer in this space, insofar as it is transcontextual. There is a tremendous field of cultural neuroscience, and we know that the way that my brain and body interact with my environment is in many ways influenced by the culture, the norms, the setting which we grow up in, how we form relationships, the degree to which we're bonded to others in our community versus independent. But at the same time, the human heart, the human liver, the immune system, there's so many shared elements of this across space, time, and culture. And by using neuroscience, by promoting neuroscience, cognitive psychology, as a method of understanding better the human condition and a way to better understand how we can work towards peace and conflict resolution, has tremendous power, not only in countries where there is division, but across cultures and times. We recently were engaged in a project in Colombia with colleagues at the U.S. Institute of Peace, working with a group of religious leaders, of evangelical pastors and Catholic priests in Medellin, who have been hosting and dealing with some of the psychosocial challenges of migrants from Venezuela and communities in the Bajo Cauca region that have been exposed to cyclical forms of violence for many, really, generations. And one thing that they were very skeptical of is, okay, you're a team of psychologists and neuroscientists. We have our history of using faith, our faith traditions, to provide what we need to our populations. There was hesitancy, there was resistance. People wanted to start every session talking about the effects of trauma on the brain and the body with prayer. And instead of us being opposed to it, we were actually incredibly all for it, because the way that we integrate neuroscience and cognitive psychology to promote peace building is by complementing these already existent, enduring forms of knowledge. Trauma and conflict have been around a lot longer than neuroscience, and communities have found ways to cope and to heal and to overcome. Yet we also have seen continued division, continued polarization, and entrenched identity politics that have really not found solutions that seem to be scalable. And one way that we have been really promoting the use of neuroscience and of cognitive psychology is by offering it as a complementary perspective, that there is nothing threatening about the use of neuroscience for peace building initiatives. There shouldn't be anything threatening about it. If we're presenting it in a threatening way, there's a problem with us as a scientific community, not with the receiving community. It's not intended to be a cudgel that we beat people over the head with, that, oh, some science will help this work. No, this is about partnership, deep and intense partnership with communities who have lived through violence and conflict for generations, who have tried time and time again to overcome. And so how we integrate neuroscience in communities to create approaches that are scalable and sustainable, really, I see the most promise on two key fronts. The first is in design, how we design interventions. And Boaz, I know Professor Hamiri has talked about this many times with me and in his presentation, of course, that there's ways that we can design interventions, if it's communication, if it's social contact programming, whatever it might be. There's ways to design interventions that are more informed by cutting-edge findings from neuroscience. Neuroscience offers us a way to challenge our existing assumptions about what works and what doesn't. It doesn't offer a panacea. Knowing what part of someone's brain is lighting up when they're processing a certain piece of information or being exposed to a certain stimulus only gets us so far. Understanding what's going on in the brain as far as blood flow and oxygen when someone is going through a process of a mindset shift or an attitudinal shift or even forgiveness, as Dr. De Brigar will talk about, this is helpful and useful insofar as we're able to take that information and change how we design programs, taking what communities already know how to do and infusing them with those little bits of insights to change the way that that program is done, to change the way we conduct an intergroup contact program or a radio program or a television program, whatever the intervention that we want to do is. The science and the evidence offers us a way to complement what communities already have that innate knowledge to know how to do. And the second is, of course, in the evaluation front. For so many years, I've seen the peace building sector be stuck in not knowing how to evaluate the work that they do, to understand effectiveness. And we have many, many new survey tools and ways of generating insights, but we also are seeing increased integration of more advanced techniques. And some of the wearable technologies, for example, that we see used by neuroscientists around the world are becoming more and more readily deployable and adaptable in field settings. And it's incredibly encouraging to see how we can have a better marriage of some of this advanced technology, which has so often been used only in lab settings and with advertisement agencies, now being able to bring that into spaces where we're looking at really the embodied nature of conflict and of peace. In the same way that we know how conflict can do tremendous damage to the brain and to the body and to our social experience in the world, we also are really seeing tremendous promise in the integration of these cutting-edge technologies to be able to change the way that we measure how peace can be achieved in these same communities. And I really am looking forward to the other colleagues diving more deeply into specific interventions. But I wanted to leave it with a general comment of having worked with Emil, with Andres, with Boaz for several years. We're really seeing neuroscience as offering a complementary path to liberation and to agency of communities. We're seeing a new generation of activist scientists. In our work around the world, whether it's in Colombia or training police and hospital staff in El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala, or the work that I've been doing in the Middle East in teaching young refugees about the effect of stress and trauma on the brain, what we're trying to do is to use science as a tool for liberation, for increasing individuals' agency, to design interventions that make sense in their context, but also ensuring that we're not contributing to the knowledge inequalities that exist in the world. The ability to design scientifically informed interventions is something that the scientific community has to pursue by making findings readily available and accessible and understandable to communities while maintaining the highest ethical standards in doing that. And so I just wanted to frame this overall sense of where we at Beyond Conflict have seen this sector take shape. And I'm really excited to continue to learn from the rest of the colleagues who are here. And thank you to all of the organizers for doing this event in honor of our friend and colleague, Dr. Emile Bruneau. I look forward to hearing lessons learned from our other colleagues.